If he wants to help small business, he could start by cancelling his plan for putting up the small rate of corporation tax for small business. In the last fortnight, we've learnt that housing repossessions are up 71%, unemployment is rising at its fastest rate for 17 years, and the economy is shrinking. Will he now finally admit that he did not abolish boom and bust?
Mr. Speaker, I've already told him we have had the longest period of growth in the history of this country. We have created 3 million jobs during that period of time. We've been able to double public investment in education, health and transport. And if we were to have taken his advice, we would not have nationalised Northern Rock. We would not have taken the action to deal with the problems of IchBOS and other banks in this country, and he would have loosened the regulation on banks at a time when everybody is saying to increase it. I'm not going to take any advice from the Leader of the Opposition on these matters.
How can the Prime Minister not admit that there's an economic bust when 120 homes are being repossessed every day, and when the Bank of England says 1.2 million people are going to go into negative equity? If he can't admit what he got wrong in the past, why will anyone listen to him about the present or the future? Let me turn to his fiscal rules, which allowed him to pile up this huge borrowing in a boom. He said that his fiscal rules were, and I quote, "the basis on which I think people have seen this government as competent." He said they were right for every stage of the economic cycle, and he absolutely guaranteed, that was the word he used, guaranteed he would not break them. Does he accept the fiscal rules are now dead?
First of all, I think the opposition should listen for a minute, because first of all, and maybe they will learn something. First of all, the cause of the crisis that we are facing started in the private banking sector, not with national governments. If he doesn't understand that that is the problem, he will not be able to come to a proper solution. Because the solution lies in recapitalising the banks, and then ensuring that they start lending again. And if we could have a sensible debate about that across the floor of this House, and he removed the partisan way that he is dealing with, as he promised to do. Mr. Speaker, he was the man who was going to end the Punch and Judy show. He was the man that was going to have a bipartisan approach. And as for the fiscal rules, we have met our fiscal rules. We have met them in the last 10 years. If I may remind them, borrowing has been 1% under the Labour government over these last 10 years. It was 3% under the Conservative government. They broke the roof. We fixed it.
The Prime Minister says... There's plenty more. The Prime Minister says he wants us to listen. We've been listening for 10 years about his fiscal rules. He has stood there and lectured us about the brilliance of his fiscal rules. Why won't he now admit they're dead? Rule 1, let's just remember, he used to be so proud of them. Rule 1 was only borrow to invest. Now he's having to borrow to pay for unemployment benefit. That rule is dead. Rule 2 was they don't like being reminded about their own fiscal rules. They used to enjoy the lectures so much. Rule 2 was don't have debt over 40% of national income. Even on his own fiddled figures, that rule is now dead. Why won't he admit that the rules failed to deliver responsibility in the good years, and as soon as the bad times came, they collapsed completely?
Mr. Speaker, can I just remind him what he said only a few days ago? But, Mr. Speaker, it is important to the issue. He said, borrowing is inevitable, and you have to allow that to happen. These automatic stabilisers, as Keynes called them, those have to operate. Now he's saying with the Shadow Chancellor said this morning in a newspaper that borrowing is the wrong approach. He said a few days ago it was the right approach. When will they get their act together and show that they have one coherent policy?
He cannot tell us whether his fiscal rules are alive or dead or in some sort of suspended animation. We've established he's broken his fiscal rules. We've established he led the economy from boom to bust. Now let's look at what he's going to do about it. Does he agree with me that you cannot spend your way out of a recession?
Mr. Speaker, I just repeat what he said. Mr. Speaker, if he has said that borrowing is inevitable, you have to allow that to happen, the automatic stabilisers have to operate, then that means we have to spend in a way that takes us through this economic crisis. If he doesn't understand what he said a few days ago, then perhaps his meetings with the Shadow Chancellor have not been about economics at all in the last few days.
I asked the Prime Minister if he agreed with me whether you couldn't spend your way out of a recession. Why didn't he just say yes? Because I've got a quote for him. It's something he said in 1997, not in some... Yes? Remember? Oh, it's 10 years ago, so it doesn't count. Is that the new rule? Now, this wasn't some off-the-cuff speech. This was at the Labour Party conference. The Labour Party conference as Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he said this: "We have learnt from past mistakes. You cannot spend your way out of a recession." Isn't the truth this? The Prime Minister has been going round telling everyone he's the new John Maynard Keynes with his plan for a spending splurge. Meanwhile, the pound has fallen further than in any previous devaluation, and the Chancellor is having desperately to back off. So will he confirm, is he planning a spending splurge or not?
Mr. Speaker, I thought, and he's quoting Keynes, I thought he said he supported Keynes when the automatic stabiliser should work. Let me just remind him again where the Conservative Party is. The person who was shadowing for the Shadow Chancellors last week, he went on to one interview on the BBC, and he said, to increase borrowing to deal with an economic downturn, that's a perfectly sensible thing to do. And then a few minutes later, he also said increasing borrowing is not a strategy for dealing with the recession. Mr. Speaker, they are nowhere on policy to deal with the problem.
I know the new fiscal rule: never answer the question. The fact is, the Prime Minister has been caught red-handed. He spun a line about a spending splurge to try and look like he had a plan, but his Treasury Secretary said the government was just going to not increase spending, but maintain spending. He's been caught irresponsibly spinning about irresponsible spending. Isn't the truth this? He hasn't got a plan, he's just got a giant overdraft. Isn't the case this? Thousands of people are losing their homes and their jobs because this Prime Minister's irresponsible boom has now turned to bust.
Mr. Speaker, the thousands of people in our country at the moment who are worried about their homes and worried about their jobs will want to know they have a government that is prepared to take the action that is necessary to deal with the problem. This Conservative Party says borrowing is the wrong approach. I say it is right to take the action that is necessary to take us through these difficulties. This party opposite has no policy. They are not prepared for government. They are not even prepared for opposition.